Some time ago, there was a book called Dark Mission. I believe that's the name. Something about the secret space program of NASA, and of course, you know, I think Richard C. Hoagland was one of the authors, and of course, a lot of people will dismiss their research and their writing as hokum or conspiracy theory. So that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. However, they mentioned something in the book that I found very interesting, and for some reason, it continued to I've continued to be reminded of it. So I decided to look a little further into it. One of their claims was that there are glass dome structures on the surface of the moon. And you would think that that would be a terrible idea because of all of the meteorites and micrometeorites that potentially could strike the surface of the moon, and from all of the crater evidence already on the moon, that would be a terrible idea because glass as we know it for the most part can easily be broken. But what the authors mentioned was that glass manufactured in the vacuum of space would be free of a lot of the impurities that would get into the structure of the glass, and that it would actually be harder than steel. So can you imagine if that were true? Let's take away the idea, first of all, because this is not what I'm exploring. Let's take away the idea that it has anything to do with a pre-human or another civilization on the moon. Just the fact that they brought that idea up is interesting. And so wouldn't that be very useful to be able to create structures that are transparent but also provide the protective qualities of steel, something even harder than steel, and in the vacuum of space? Now, why would that be useful? If those structures aren't already extant on the moon, there are reasons why that would be useful. For example, there are plans to build a solar power collection station on the surface of the moon, and as well as a infrared laser communication system. And there will be an AI powered robot that has 8 arms or so that's going to go up and build these structures, at least one of them. And then there are going to be lunar outposts on the moon. One company that will be providing the power support for that, I believe, if I recall correctly, is called Astrobotics. And the way it works is that Astrobotics has created rovers that can be loaded onto a rocket and a lander, and these robots, these rovers, will be tethered to the solar power collection station, and they will drive around to the different lunar outposts and beam the energy wirelessly to these various different stations. So you can the various different bases will be powered, just like how we don't need wires to send electricity to anything. It's just that wires just happen to direct the energy a lot better. But this would be interesting that these rovers would park in the vicinity to line up their transmitter of electrical power to the receiver of the electrical power on the lunar bases or the lunar outposts. And then you have, how would this solar power station be protected, or even many of these lunar outposts? it would be great to be able to see the environment around and have windows just as you do here on Earth. So if the glass being harder than steel, if manufactured in a vacuum of space, is true, then that would be very useful. So looking at some quick searches, of course using Master Google, I simply asked a question: can glass be manufactured in the vacuum of space? And a few research papers came up and some names, and I believe I downloaded one of the PDFs, but they were both directly connected to NASA already. One of the things that an AI overview just gave, the answer says yes, glass can be manufactured in the vacuum of space, and the microgravity and vacuum conditions can make manufacturing processes easier to control. And I find it fascinating that it mentions the moon. The next sentence says, for example, lunar glasses made in the moon's hard vacuum conditions could be very strong and useful for space structures. Additionally, the ability to capture solar radiation and convert it to thermal energy can help produce advanced materials like ultra-strong glasses and ceramics. How about that? All of the things that I just mentioned before leading up to this are mentioned in these short paragraphs. Manufacturing glass in a vacuum condition on the surface of the moon, capturing solar radiation, turning it into energy, and producing advanced materials like ultra-strong glasses. Just scrolling down a little bit, there's the first resource is from NASA, and I'm going to click on that, and it is titled Vacuum Strength of 2 Candidate Glasses for a Space Observatory. So I haven't seen this one before, but that's the first thing that came up there, and it's a PDF. I wonder what year this is from. It's asking me to download it. I'm not going to do that now. So its source of acquisition is NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. And again, the title is Vacuum Strength of 2 Candidate Glasses for a Space Observatory by T.A. Manning, D.S. Tucker, K.A. Heron, and D.A. Gregory, from the University of Alabama in Huntsville, Alabama, and NASA George C. Marshall Space Flight Center, also in Huntsville, Alabama. Let's see what it says to start off with. It says the strengths of 2 candidate glass types for use in a space observatory were measured. Samples of ultra-low expansion glass, ULE, and borosilicate, Pyrex, were tested in air and in vacuum at room temperature, 20 degrees Celsius, and in vacuum after being heated to 200 degrees Celsius. Both glasses tested in vacuum showed an increase in strength over those tested in air. However, there was no statistical difference between the strength of samples tested in vacuum at room temperature and those tested in vacuum after heating to 200 degrees Celsius. So a feasibility study was performed to determine if a large aperture of around 150 meters space surveillance observatory could be manufactured and robotically assembled in space. So that's very interesting, because also what I had just mentioned before about the infrared laser communications array to be built by an AI controlled robot with 8 arms, right? So now NASA also is mentioning something like that here. It says 150 meter space surveillance observatory can be manufactured and robotically assembled in space. Robotically assembled in space. I'm excited about that because I haven't seen this before. I'm cold reading this. I just decided to look it up. I just sat down. I was going to do something else, but it's for some reason been scratching on the inside of my skull. So it says it was determined that rather than constructing one large optic, a sparse array of 1 or 2 meter diameter optics would be more efficient and easier to construct. Due to the massive size of the observatory and the inherent delicacy of large optical elements, the most promising option is to ship raw glass material to a manufacturing device in space, which will produce the optics for later assembly. The vacuum strength testing of glass detailed below is performed to examine some possible effects of processing candidate glass types in space. I like when they lead sentences with this next one. It says that it is well established that subcritical crack growth in environments containing water vapor is caused by a stress corrosion reaction between water and the stressed glass. It is thus necessary to understand the effect of vacuum on the strength of the candidate glasses. So that was also in Dark Mission. One of the things that was mentioned is that the impurities found at the surface of Earth would actually are one of the things, amongst other elements, that corrupt the strength of glass on the surface of the Earth. So, and I'll see if I can put the link to this PDF here from NASA. It's at ntrs.nasa.gov is where it's found. So, continuing, it says, so it is thus necessary to understand the effect of vacuum on the strength of the candidate glasses. Wiederhorn investigated the effects of a dry environment N2 gas on crack growth. He demonstrated an exponential dependence of crack velocity on applied load or stress intensity factor. Pook and others reported crack growth in vacuum of selected glasses. Wiederhorn and others looked at crack growth in vacuum for normal glasses and two glasses exhibiting anomalous elastic behavior. Interesting, anomalous elastic behavior. They found that the normal glass exhibited subcritical crack growth. However, the two anomalous glasses did not. Wiederhorn and others also found that ultra-low expansion glass did not undergo subcritical crack growth in a vacuum. So I'm not going to read any more of that. It's only 9 pages actually, but I'm going to scroll down and see what it says at the bottom. But that right there is just one confirmation of what was mentioned in that book. It makes you wonder how much of the other stuff they talked about in that crazy book that might seem like a conspiracy theory to people about bases being on the moon before humans ever went there are true. But again, I'm not saying that it's just interesting that how we can weave such interesting stories from science. Now let's see. So all of these papers, we got stuff going back to 1946. Wow. T.C. Baker, all right, 1946, 1949, 1970, 71, 2003, 67, 70, 74, 74, 96. So the newest paper that was referenced in here is 2007, it looks like. All right, so I wonder when this paper was published. I don't see the publication date, or maybe I missed it. But again, it's called Vacuum Strength of Two Candidate Glasses for a Space Observatory. So that's the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. So let's see if there's other things here. Oh yeah, this is the one that I saw earlier from the person. I don't know if this name is pronounced Blacik, or Blakic. It's spelled B-L-A-C-I-C from 1985. And this, let's see what this paper, it's called Glass and Ceramics by Larry A. Haskin. And this looks like they are speculating about how glass and ceramics can be produced from bulk lunar materials or from separated components. This is fascinating that a lot of this work is related to materials on the moon and creating glass on the moon, when there was a claim in a so-called conspiracy theory book that talks about glass domes being on the moon, and that the reason why they would be structurally sufficient is because of the properties of glass manufactured in a vacuum environment of space. I find that interesting. Not that it's true, anything that they said in that book, Dark Mission. It's a good book, even if it's purely science fiction, but science fiction contains a lot of science in it. So this is what Larry A. Haskin says in Glass and Ceramics. It says, a variety of glasses and ceramics can be produced from bulk lunar materials or from separated components. Many glassy materials have been described in previous studies, Mackenzie and Claridge, 1979, Criswell, 1980. They include sintered, that's heated and pressed regolith, quenched molten basalt, and transparent glass formed from fused plagioclase. No research has been carried out on lunar material or close simulants, so properties are not known in detail. However, common glass technologies such as molding and spinning seem feasible. Uses of glass include structural applications. Listen to this: bricks, slabs, beams, and of course windows shouldn't be a surprise, but they're talking about glass here. That glass can be used as bricks, slabs, and beams. That's not something we normally think of when we think of the properties of glass. We normally just think of them as windows or utensils, like a cup or a bowl, something that like I'm wearing on my face to correct my myopia, but not as bricks, slabs, beams, or windows. All right, so there's a lot of that. Let's see. There's some more. I'm scrolling through a lot of it. It says, among the high leverage uses of fused silicate materials in the proposed utilization of non-terrestrial resources are the fabrication of heat shields for orbital transfer vehicles traveling from the moon to Earth, and the use of sintered or melted and sand-cast soil for structural support in unpressurized lunar shelters. It's also interesting there, because of, again, I previously mentioned the plans to build lunar bases, to wirelessly charge them from tethered rovers that are built from a solar energy collection station on the moon, and as well as the infrared laser communication arrays. Now, those would be used for Mars missions, and of course for communicating with any manned missions to Mars. And also, it would be necessary to construct the moon bases. This is just a little side note, because of forward and backward contamination issues. For example, if there were any microorganisms discovered on the surface of Mars, they could potentially be very problematic if brought directly to Earth. One example of this is something that is affectionately called Conan the bacterium, which is a bacteria found on Earth that, when subjected to Mars-like conditions, showed, which means the exposure to extreme solar and other cosmic radiation, where it would kill most organisms on Earth, of course including humans and all other forms of life, that this Conan the bacterium, radiodurans is its scientific name, is that it, when buried under just a few feet of soil, increases its lifespan to millions of years. So about 10 centimeters, the lifespan goes up to a few million years that it can survive under the harsh radiation of the sun and other cosmic radiation. And if buried at a depth of 10 meters, then the lifespan goes up to about 280 million years. And so it's not very safe, it would be assumed, if we brought something like that back to Earth at first. So constructing a base on the moon to work with these things and using that as a way station and a way to decontaminate before returning to Earth would actually be a practical and logical solution to finding anything on Mars. Bring it to the moon first as a way station before bringing it to Earth. There, in that way, you can see what would happen, and if there would be any outbreaks or contamination, or to see what would happen to it in that environment before it's brought to the Earth, if it ever is advisable that that is done. So that's just a side note there about some of the reasons for that. But again, it says so. And this work says that these can be made into heat shields for orbital transfer vehicles traveling from the moon to Earth, and the use of sintered or melted and sand-cast soil for structural support in unpressurized lunar shelters. The work of Blachik, I'm just going to pronounce it Blachik because I don't know how it's pronounced, Blacic. The work of Blachik, 1985, indicates that lunar glasses made under the anhydrous hard vacuum conditions on the moon could have very high strengths and thus be quite applicable to structures in space. Pressurized or pre-stressed beams made with sintered bricks using fiberglass or iron bars as tendons may find early application as structural members. Ceramics, like those used on Earth, could be produced by chemical processing of raw lunar material. For example, fractioning volatilization of plagioclase could lead to melts for ceramic applications. So on and on it goes there. It talks about semiconductors and various other things. So that's so this site that I got it from the National Space Society was hosted by the NASA Ames Research Center from 1994 and 2018, and is now hosted by the National Space Society. So that's where that comes from. That's Glass and Ceramics, Larry A. Haskin. So I think that's enough interesting stuff I just wanted to look through to find out if there was any merit whatsoever to the claims that glass manufactured in the vacuum of space would actually be anything coming close to being as hard as steel. And so far it looks like there is some validity to that. And again, it would take a lot more than just looking at two research papers, but they're from two credible sources, it would seem, both directly connected to NASA and both mentioning very similar, almost identical information as was found in the book Dark Mission. So, can glass be manufactured in the vacuum of space, and will it be any more durable and useful in space? It seems like the answer is yes, but this is just for you to do some more of your own research and decide.